Welcome to Griffonomics.
And, the stakes here are just massive.
Yeah.
I mean, we are literally watching a $14 billion battleship attempt to, swap out its engine for a nuclear reactor while in the middle of a firefight.
Yeah.
It is this real-time corporate evolution that could totally redefine the entire government services sector.
Exactly. And today, we are pointing our lens right at that massive transformation. We're looking at a pretty granular strategic report and an investment roadmap exploring Amentum's post-merger transformation here in 2026.
Right.
For those tracking the ticker, that's AMTM. And our mission for this deep dive is, well, it's highly specific. We are going to dissect whether Amentum is just stuck as a legacy, low-margin government contractor,
Or if they're successfully pivoting into this highly profitable, high-margin technical architect.
right, a technical architect. And this isn't just some theoretical exercise for you to listen to.
No, not at all.
We're looking at a company that has fundamentally reshaped itself over the last 24 months. And the financial markets are watching every single move to see if the architecture actually holds up under pressure.
Yeah, and to do this, we've pulled together a phenomenal stack of sources for you. I mean, we are pulling directly from Amentum's recent Q2 2026 earnings call transcripts,
Yeah.
really pressing deep into their financial architecture.
Yep.
We also have a slew of recent press releases covering these multi-billion-dollar contracts across Europe and the U.S., and we're layering in critical analyst reports that scrutinize Amentum's post-merger trajectory following that massive integration of Jacobs Critical Mission Solutions, or CMS.
And here is why you, as the listener, should actually care about this. Amentum is not some niche startup, right? Following that Jacobs merger, they are now a $14 billion enterprise.
Massive.
Yeah, they have over 50,000 employees globally spread across, I think, more than 70 countries. But more importantly, they're fundamentally rewiring their financial architecture in real time.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
Oh, absolutely. Understanding this pivot provides an absolute masterclass in how massive government service providers attempt to expand their profit margins. It's like this live playbook of asset divestiture, accounting shifts, and strategic repositioning.
Moving a ship of that size, it requires highly deliberate mechanical steps. When you have 50,000 employees accustomed to one specific way of doing business,
Right.
turning them into a high-margin technology powerhouse is incredibly difficult. You have to change what you sell, who you sell it to, and fundamentally how you account for the money coming in the door.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with their core business model and this overarching strategy they're actively pursuing, the sources define this as the technical architect pivot.
Yeah, that's the buzzword.
Right. Basically, Amentum is trying to shed this historical identity they had as a low-margin labor provider. They want to be known now as a high-end technical architect. To put this in perspective for you, I like to use a construction industry analogy.
That's a good way to look at it.
Imagine a massive skyscraper being built. Historically, a legacy government contractor might be the crew out there physically pouring the concrete, tying the rebar, managing the day-to-day physical labor.
Sweating out in the sun.
Exactly. And that work is essential, obviously, but it's heavily commoditized. It is inherently low margin because you are competing on hourly labor rates. Amentum is essentially saying, we no longer want to be the crew pouring the concrete. We want to be the firm drawing the blueprints.
Right. Running the complex physics simulations, managing the grid integration.
Yes. They want the high-margin, highly specialized intellectual work.
And that analogy, it really captures the owner's engineer concept that we see heavily emphasized throughout these analyst
They're
reports.
just engineer, yeah.
When Amentum acts as an owner's engineer, they are operating entirely upstream of the actual physical labor. They're acting as a strategic technical advisor to the government or the commercial client. They manage the regulatory compliance. They handle systems integration. They do the front-end engineering design.
So they aren't swinging the hammers.
Exactly. They're not acting as the physical builder, bearing the brunt of the construction risk, the supply chain delays or the raw material costs.
They are selling their brain power, not their muscle. And looking at the financials, this strategy feeds directly into the most critical metric we polled regarding their business model, which is their capital light structure.
This is wild.
It is a staggering data point. Historically, Amentum spends only about 0.3% of its revenue on capital expenditures, or CapEx. Let's really emphasize that for you. 0.3%.
Yeah.
That is practically a rounding error for a $14 billion company.
It really is. For context, a traditional defense contractor and someone building tanks or fighter jets, they might spend anywhere from 4 to 8% of their revenue on capital expenditures.
Because of the factories.
Right. They had to build massive manufacturing plants, buy specialized tooling, maintain vast physical supply chains. Amentum just sidesteps all of that. The Q2 numbers highlight exactly how this plays out in real time.
Let's hear the numbers.
Okay, so in the second quarter of 2026, the company generated $225 million in operating cash inflow. But to maintain their operations, to keep the lights on and the business moving forward, they required only $5 million in capital expenditures.
Wow, so $225 million comes in the door from their operations, and they only have to spend $5 million on physical equipment or facilities.
Yeah.
That leaves $220 million.
Which converts directly into free cash flow. And this is why this matters to you, whether you are an investor building a portfolio or just an analyst tracking the defense and government services sector. Free cash flow is the absolute lifeblood of corporate flexibility.
Because they aren't tied down.
Right, because Amentum isn't building physical factories, because they aren't manufacturing hardware or buying fleets of heavy machinery. Almost all of their operating cash flow converts cleanly. Their product is human and intellectual capital. They are deploying data scientists, cyber experts, and nuclear engineers.
The product goes home at 5 p.m. It doesn't sit in a warehouse depreciating, requiring maintenance, or becoming obsolete when the next generation of microchips is released.
Yeah, it creates a highly efficient cash engine that fuels everything else they're trying to do, from paying down debt to funding strategic acquisitions. It's a brilliant model if you can execute it at scale.
So let's look at where they are actually deploying that intellectual capital, because this brings us to a major strategic inflection point for the company. And there is really no better place to see this owner's engineer model in action than the global nuclear energy supercycle.
Oh, the nuclear sector is huge for them right now.
Massive. Amentum is racking up some incredible wins here, positioning themselves as the primary engineering partner for the European nuclear renaissance. We have 2 massive new build contracts to look at in the sources.
Let's hit the UK one first.
Right. There is the $406 million 14-year contract with Great British Energy in the UK. Amentum is leading a joint venture called Litmus Nuclear, partnering with Cavendish Nuclear, to act as the owner's engineer for the UK's first small modular reactors, or SMRs, at the Wilpha site in North Wales.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Netherlands. They just won a $207 million framework agreement to help develop up to 2 new gigawatt-scale nuclear power plants. They are leading the NSUSNL consortium for that one.
The structure of that NXUSNL consortium in the Netherlands, it really proves your blueprint analogy from earlier.
Guess so.
Well, Amentum is bringing the global project delivery and systems integration expertise. But look at who they brought to the table with them. They are partnered with Arcadis, who handles the conventional environmental licensing and site selection. They have Tractebel, who leads the actual front-end engineering design of the nuclear island. And NRG Palace, providing the highly specialized Dutch nuclear regulatory expertise. Amentum is essentially the architect integrating all of this high-level intellectual capital into a single, cohesive advisory package for the Dutch government.
But to really appreciate why this pivot to an owner's engineer is so crucial for their profit margins, we have to contrast these new builds with Amentum's legacy work, because they still do a lot of traditional nuclear cleanup, right?
Oh, yeah. They have a massive footprint in legacy environmental remediation. And the contrast in the risk profile is just night and day.
Give us an example.
Let's look at a recent award from the European Commission Joint Research Center, or JRC. It is a 2-year, $112 million contract for an Amentum-led joint venture to provide decommissioning and waste management solutions across 4 nuclear research sites in Italy, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
Now that sounds like serious, heavy-duty physical labor.
It is incredibly complex, incredibly dangerous work. Look at the physical reality outlined in the contract details. They're doing remediation work on disused facilities. They're physically dismantling research reactors, tearing apart particle accelerators, and cleaning out hot cells.
Hot cells. For those unfamiliar, a hot cell is a heavily shielded containment chamber where highly radioactive substances were historically handled by scientists using remote manipulator arms.
Right.
So they are literally in the radioactive zone, physically taking things apart, handling contaminated materials. I mean, the physical safety risks to the personnel, the operational risks of dealing with hazardous material, the massive insurance premiums required for that kind of labor that is immense.
Risk.
Yeah.
And the same goes for their 15-year, multi-billion billion-pound decommissioning framework at the Sellafield site in the UK.
Right, I saw that in the notes.
They're using remote-operated vehicles and massive vacuum suction systems, what they call the bulk sludge retrieval tool, to pull highly radioactive sludge out of legacy storage ponds that have just been sitting there for decades. It is absolutely vital environmental work, but it carries immense physical hazards and the constant looming threat of financial liabilities or cost overruns if something goes wrong in the physical world.
And that is the aha moment right there for their strategy. When Amentum acts as an owner's engineer on those new SMR builds in the UK or the gigawatt plants in the Netherlands, they are avoiding the physical hazards of radioactive waste entirely.
Completely avoiding it.
They are avoiding the massive financial liabilities of physical construction. They are sitting on a desk, running the digital CAD models, managing the regulatory compliance, and advising the client on how to build it safely.
Yeah, they're entirely separated from the physical risk, which drastically improves their risk-adjusted margin profile.
It's the difference between being the bomb squad out in the field, sweating over the wires, and being the engineer sitting in a laboratory who designs the bomb squad's protocols from a safe distance.
Exactly.
Both are incredibly valuable to society, but one carries significantly less risk to life and limb and commands a higher profit margin for the specialized intellectual property being provided.
That's a perfect way to frame it.
Okay, let's stick with domains that require massive technical infrastructure and pivot to space. Because Amentum just secured what looks like a monumental win here. The 10-year, $4 billion Space Force range contract.
Yeah, this is one of the most significant awards in the sector this year, and it tells us a lot about their competitive positioning.
And this raises a huge question that I think a lot of people looking at this space would ask. How does a company suddenly jump the line and beat out the top 5 defense primes, the Lockheeds, the Boeings, the Northrop Grummans of the world for a space operations contract of this magnitude?
It's a great question.
I mean, you don't just walk into the Pentagon and say, hey, we'd like to run your space ranges.
No, you definitely don't. The answer is entirely tied to the Jacobs Critical Mission Solutions merger we mentioned at the top of the deep dive. The Jacobs integration was the specific mechanical catalyst that allowed Amentum to win this bid.
Okay.
In the world of federal acquisition, the mechanism that determines who wins these contracts relies heavily on a concept called past performance.
Let's explain that mechanism to everyone because it's crucial. In government contracting, you can't just promise you'll do a good job or present a flashy PowerPoint. You need an audited, verified resume.
Under the federal acquisition regulation, the government is essentially legally bound to evaluate your historical track record. If you bid on managing a massive national security space asset, you must prove you have successfully managed similar assets in the past.
Right.
You literally cannot submit a compliant winning bid for a Tier 1 space asset without years of documented experience doing exactly that type of work.
So Amentum bought that resume?
Yes. If you look closely at the press release for the Space Force Award, the contract was officially awarded to Amentum, quote, through its wholly owned subsidiary Jacobs Technology, Inc.
Interesting.
Yeah. Amentum's chief operating officer explicitly stated that the award builds on decades of trusted institutional knowledge and performance supporting the nation's space launch infrastructure. Jacobs had that history. They had the past performance.
So Amentum bought that institutional knowledge when they acquired Jacobs CMS, and they immediately leveraged it as the key to unlock a $4 billion prime national security contract that they otherwise could never have won.
Exactly. It is a fascinating strategic acquisition. They didn't just buy revenue, they bought access to an entirely new tier of government procurement.
And the scope of this Space Force contract is incredibly ambitious. They are tasked with modernizing the Launch and Test Range System, the LTRS. This covers the eastern and western ranges. So we are talking about Patrick Space Force Base, Cape Canaveral in Florida, Vandenberg out in California.
That's huge.
And they aren't just being hired to maintain the status quo. The Space Force currently supports about 100 launches a year. Amentum is being brought in to enable a high-cadence, multi-user spaceport model that aims for 300 to 500 launches annually.
A 5-fold scale-up in launch cadence is a staggering logistical challenge. Think about what that requires. You have to coordinate commercial launches from SpaceX or Blue Origin, classified military payloads, NASA scientific missions, all sharing the exact same physical range infrastructure.
Right. The scheduling alone is a nightmare.
And to achieve that kind of cadence, The physical systems, the tracking radars, the telemetry antennas, the weather sensors, they have to be completely overhauled and digitized.
The contract specifically notes Amentum will be implementing digital transformation and enhanced range resilience. But the bottleneck there isn't just buying new radar dishes. It's recruiting what the military calls low-density, high-demand technical talent.
Yeah, finding the right people.
We are talking about highly specialized radar engineers, range safety analysts, data scientists who can process telemetry streams in real time. Again, it comes back to highly specialized human capital.
Which perfectly aligns with the broader strategy. They're providing the brains to run the most complex infrastructure on the planet.
Okay, so we've established the technical architect pivot in nuclear and space. Let's look at how they are building an infrastructure around this, what the analysts are calling the autonomy moat.
Yeah, the unmanned systems stuff.
We see this clearly in their recent work with unmanned systems. They just secured a $995 million remotely piloted aircraft maintenance support IDIQ contract for the MQ-9 Reaper drone. First, let's clarify that acronym for you listening, because the government loves its alphabet soup. An IDIQ is an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract.
Right. It functions essentially like a pre-approved menu with a maximum spending limit. The government awards the overall IDIQ framework, say for $995 million over several years, but they don't hand over a check for that amount on day one.
Right.
Instead, as specific needs arise, say a squadron needs an upgrade in Nevada, or a deployment needs support overseas, the government issues specific task orders against that IDIQ master contract.
Yeah.
It guarantees Amentum is the approved vendor to pull from, providing a very steady, predictable revenue pipeline over time as those task orders are issued.
And the MQ-9 Reaper is a formidable asset. It's a strategic element of modern warfare, packed with multispectral sensors, satellite data links, and precision armaments. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the word maintenance is in the contract title, it is really easy to assume this is just legacy labor.
Yeah, you picture a mechanic with a greasy wrench changing tires on a runway.
Exactly. But the sources highlight that Amentum is delivering unique operational constructs like satellite launch and recovery, or SLR.
And SLR completely changes the paradigm of drone operations. Historically, launching and landing an MQ-9 required a massive footprint. You had to forward deploy a full ground control station, line-of-sight antennas, and a huge team of specialized pilots and sensor operators to an austere base somewhere close to the conflict zone.
Which is a logistical nightmare.
It is expensive, logistically heavy, and most importantly, it puts personnel at risk.
But with SLR.
With a satellite launch and recovery, you can launch that drone and immediately hand over control to a pilot sitting in a secure facility in Nevada, operating entirely over satellite data links. It requires a minimal physical footprint forward.
Right.
But making that work requires highly complex digital engineering sustainment. You have to ensure the onboard software, the encrypted satellite links, the ground station servers, and the physical asset are perfectly integrated and entirely secure from cyber threats. It is an IT and systems engineering job, not a traditional mechanics job.
So they're modernizing incredibly complex autonomous systems. But at the same time, we see a totally different move on the chessboard in the sources. In June 2025, Amentum sold off their Rapid Solutions hardware business to Lockheed Martin for $360 million.
Yeah, that caught a lot of people off guard.
Let me push back on the strategy for a second on behalf of our listeners, because this seems contradictory. Wait, if Amentum claims to be a cutting-edge tech company, why are they selling off their hardware manufacturing division? Doesn't building the actual physical tech make you a tech company?
It's a counterintuitive truth, but selling Rapid Solutions actually accelerates their strategy. We have to look at the underlying economics of hardware manufacturing.
Okay.
It is incredibly capital intensive. To build physical widgets, whether that's advanced antennas, specialized sensors, or ruggedized communications gear, you need factories. You need complex, vulnerable supply chains. You need to buy raw materials. And you need massive internal research and development budgets just to stay relevant.
It's the exact opposite of the capital light model we discussed.
Yeah.
It drags down that free cash flow engine because you are constantly pouring cash back into physical infrastructure.
Exactly that. By divesting Rapid Solutions, Amentum is doubling down on its post-merger strategy to become a pure-play provider of technology-enabled solutions. They're letting massive aerospace primes like Lockheed Martin companies that are already built for capital-intensive manufacturing handle the hardware.
Right.
Amentum wants to focus purely on the software, the integration, and the analytics that make that hardware useful.
So they don't want to build the drone. They want to build the AI that tells the drone when its engine is going to fail before it happens.
There is a perfect illustrative example of this pure play services approach in the sources regarding the CL Fire contract. Amentum recently won a 5-year, $425 million contract with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection.
I saw that.
Now, Amentum doesn't build the firefighting planes. They don't build the specialized helicopters. Lockheed, Boeing, or Sikorsky builds those.
But Amentum is the one securing a near $500 million contract to keep them flying.
Because Amentum provides the operational brainpower. They manage the deployment of 350 elite pilots and aviation mechanics across the state. But more importantly, they deploy AI-driven predictive analytics and data-driven supply chain tools to optimize the fleet sustainment.
They are crunching the data.
Yes, they analyze flight telemetry to predict when a part will fail, allowing them to order the replacement and schedule the maintenance before the aircraft is grounded during a massive wildfire.
The CEO called it an outcomes-based model during the earnings call, and that makes total sense. CL Fire doesn't care about how many hours a mechanic works. They care about the outcome. They need a fleet that is ready to fly year-round to fight fires.
Right.
Amentum is delivering that outcome using digital engineering and predictive logistics. It proves that their core product is intellect and software integration, not physical hardware. And because it relies on software and specialized personnel rather than manufacturing plants, it perfectly supports that capital-light, high free cash flow model.
It's a very clean ecosystem they're building.
Which brings us to a part of the deep dive that I think is going to absolutely fascinate anyone interested in corporate finance or accounting strategy. We are going to look at a deliberate revenue leak.
Oh, the accounting forensics section. The financial architecture here gets very sophisticated.
It really does.
And it reveals how management teams can legally and ethically use accounting standards to tell a very specific story to Wall Street.
Let's look at the backlog-rich but revenue-flat paradox. Amentum currently boasts an all-time high total backlog of $47.8 billion. They have a trailing book-to-bill ratio of 1.2x.
Right.
For context, a book-to-bill ratio measures how much new work you are signing the book versus how much work you are completing and billing for the bill. A ratio of 1.2x means for every dollar of work they finish, they are signing $1.20 in new contracts. They are consistently winning 20% more work than they are burning off.
It represents a massive fulfillment pipeline. The business development engine is clearly firing on all cylinders.
But here is where the math gets weird. When you look at their Q2 top-line revenue, it was totally flat year over year at roughly $3.5 billion. I'm looking at this and thinking, if they are winning all this massive work, the Space Force range, CL Fire, the European nuclear renaissance, why is the top-line revenue needle stuck?
It seems like a red flag initially.
Right. Executives are usually obsessed with top-line growth. It's the headline number. Why isn't the total gross revenue exploding?
What's fascinating here is that management is intentionally causing this flat revenue. They are orchestrating it. It is an accounting strategy. Amentum is deliberately moving massive energy mega projects like the Litmus Nuclear Joint Venture for the UK SMRs and that European JRC cleanup joint venture we discussed from a consolidated accounting structure to an unconsolidated accounting structure.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that because it sounds like inside baseball, but it fundamentally alters the perception of the company. What does moving from consolidated to unconsolidated actually mean for the income statement? Let's do the math.
Under standard accounting rules, when a joint venture is consolidated, the parent company, Amentum in this case, reports the full gross revenue of that massive project on their own top line. Even if they were just managing the project and passing the money along, it all flows through their headline revenue number. It makes the company look absolutely massive.
But when you switch to an unconsolidated structure,
that gross revenue is completely removed from the parent company's top line. It vanishes from the headline number entirely.
so if a joint venture generates $1 billion in gross revenue, under the new structure, Amentum's top line shows 0 for that project.
Correct. The sources indicate this shift alone created a massive 3% revenue headwind for Amentum. It is literally a revenue leak where the sheer scale of the work they are executing is being masked by the accounting treatment.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, the CEO even noted on the earnings call that if you look at their book-to-bill on an imputed basis, meaning if you did the math to include the gross revenue of those unconsolidated JVs, the ratio actually jumps from 1.2x up to an incredible 1.3x.
So they are doing the work, the scale is there, but they are intentionally hiding the gross revenue from Wall Street.
I have to ask on behalf of our listeners, why on earth would management willingly sacrifice top-line revenue? As you said, it's the headline number. It's what usually drives stock momentum.
They're doing it to avoid what analysts call the pass-through trap.
The pass-through trap. Walk us through that mechanism.
Massive government and infrastructure projects, especially in the energy and nuclear sectors, involve incredibly heavy material costs and subcontracted labor. Think about building a nuclear site or decommissioning a reactor. You need thousands of tons of specialized steel, massive amounts of poured concrete, and hundreds of specialized third-party subcontractors.
Right.
Those are pass-through costs. The government client pays Amentum, and Amentum immediately passes that money straight through to the steel supplier or the concrete vendor.
And crucially, Amentum makes zero profit on that steel. They are just the middleman handling the transaction. Precisely. It massively bloats the top-line revenue, but it yields zero, or perhaps a tiny single-digit profit. And mathematically, this destroys your profit margins. Let's run a simple example. Let's say Amentum provides $10 million of their own high-margin engineering brainpower, and they make a 10% profit on that. That's $1 million in profit. Great. But what if that same contract also includes $90 million of pass-through steel and concrete where they make zero profit?
Okay, doing the math. The total revenue is now $100 million, but the total profit is still only that $1 million from the engineering work.
And suddenly, your profit margin for that project isn't 10%, it is 1%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you consolidate that onto your income statement, your revenue denominator is massive, but your profit numerator is tiny. Your overall margin percentage looks terrible, and investors punish you for looking like a low-margin commodity business.
That makes perfect sense. So by deconsolidating those joint ventures, Amentum completely removes all that zero-margin pass-through revenue, the steel and the concrete from their top line. It shrinks the massive revenue denominator.
Yes, the bloated gross revenue disappears.
But, and this is the genius of the move, Amentum still takes their pure share of the profit from the engineering work in the joint venture, and they drop it directly to the bottom line of their income statement as what's called equity income.
They shrink the denominator to make the math look better, but they keep the exact same numerator, the actual cash profit.
The CFO, Travis Johnson, explicitly stated during the call that this transition has absolutely no impact on their actual free cash flow or their total profitability in sheer dollars. It simply changes the accounting optics to mathematically force the margin percentage higher.
And is it working? The data shows it is. The analyst reports note that this specific accounting move, driving higher equity income from unconsolidated JVs, was a primary mechanical reason. Their Global Engineering Solutions segment saw a massive 100 basis point margin expansion in Q2, reaching 8.5%.
It is a brilliant mechanical way to align their financial statements with their strategic narrative. They want to look like a high-margin tech company, not a low-margin construction firm. So they are literally deleting the construction revenue from their books while keeping the profit.
That's exactly it.
And this ties beautifully into the next crucial layer of this analysis. We need to look at their debt and cash flow dynamics. We mentioned earlier they sold the Rapid Solutions hardware business for $360 million in cash. The obvious question is, what did they do with that money? Did they pump it into research and development for new AI tools? Did they issue a massive special dividend to shareholders?
They took a much more disciplined, foundational approach. They used it for aggressive deleveraging. Management explicitly stated that shedding non-core assets like Rapid Solutions provided the liquidity needed to rapidly deleverage the balance sheet following the Jacobs merger.
And we see the specific mechanics of this in the debt markets. Following the Q2 end, they issued a new $1.4 billion term loan A, and they increased their revolving credit capacity to $1 billion.
They used those new proceeds to pay down and completely reprice their existing term loan B. This is crucial corporate finance housekeeping. You have to remember, when they merged with Jacobs CMS, they took on significant debt to finance that transaction. Now that the dust has settled, they are restructuring that debt to be far more efficient.
And they had help from the credit rating agencies, right?
Yes. They recently secured a credit rating upgrade from Moody's. That upgrade signals to the debt markets that Amentum is a safer bet. Combining that improved credit profile with the cash from the Rapid Solutions sale allowed them to successfully negotiate a reduction in their weighted average cost of debt by roughly 50 basis points.
50 basis points. That is a 0.5% reduction in interest, which on billions of dollars of debt translates to massive cash savings every single quarter. And we see the result of this debt repricing combined with that capital light model we discussed earlier in their free cash flow engine.
The numbers are great here.
The Q2 free cash flow was $220 million. That is a 315% year-over-year jump. Let that sink in. 315% growth in cash generation.
It is a monumental surge. And looking ahead, the 2026 full-year guidance projects $525 million to $575 million in free cash flow. But the analysts emphasize that we need to understand the root cause of this cash. It is not just an accounting trick from the unconsolidated JVs, and it's not entirely driven by tax synergies or lower interest payments from the debt repricing.
So where is the operational cash actually coming from?
The debt repricing provides a clear financial tailwind, but the true engine of that 315% jump in free cash flow is operational efficiency. Management attributed the surge to highly effective working capital management and a strong recovery of collections.
Let's explain working capital management. That usually comes down to managing the timing of money moving in and out, right?
Exactly. It means they're billing their government clients faster, they're chasing down their receivables more aggressively, and they are optimizing when they pay their own vendors. They are shrinking the time it takes to turn a completed hour of engineering work into cold, hard cash in the bank.
I see.
And because of the capital light model, because they only spend 0.3% of their revenue on capital expenditures, almost all of that newly optimized working capital drops straight into the free cash flow bucket. It isn't being siphoned off to build a new manufacturing plant. It is pure cash yield.
But wait, there's a massive shadow hanging over this incredible free cash flow engine we just discussed. They have this mountain of a $47.8 billion backlog. But when you look under the hood at the actual funding well, it gets complicated, which leads us perfectly into an analysis of backlog quality and political risk.
This is where things get tense.
So what does this all mean? We have talked a lot about this incredible $47.8 billion total backlog. It sounds like an impenetrable fortress of future revenue. But let's play devil's advocate for a moment, because the critical analyst reports tear right into this headline number.
The headline number is mathematically accurate, but it requires serious granular context to understand the actual near-term value.
Right. Out of that massive $47.8 billion total, only $6.9 billion is actually categorized as funded. That is only 14% of the total pie. The remaining 86% of the backlog is entirely unfunded. That feels like a massive discrepancy.
It is a critical distinction that defines the risk profile of government services. The funded backlog represents the actual work, where the client, usually Congress or an international government, has formally authorized the budget, appropriated the specific dollars, and legally committed to paying for the work. It is money in the bank waiting to be earned.
Okay.
The unfunded portion is essentially a contractual promise. It means Amentum has won the right to do the work over the next decade if the government decides to fund it year by year.
Management often points to that $47.8 billion total and claims it provides 3.4 years of visibility. They divide the backlog by their annual revenue and say, look, we have over 3 years of guaranteed work. But the analysts completely deconstruct that claim. Let's do the math again. Amentum burns through roughly $14 billion in revenue every single year. So if only $6.9 billion is actually funded today, that doesn't guarantee 3.4 years of revenue.
No, it doesn't.
It actually only guarantees about 6 months of near-term visibility before they would hypothetically run out of funded work. So I'm looking at these massive 10 and 15-year contracts. Well, governments don't just write a $4 billion check on day one, so this must be inflating the total backlog today, even though Congress is only going to fund it drop by drop every year. Is that what is causing this massive gap between funded and unfunded?
That is the mega project effect in a nutshell. You deduce the exact mechanism. Look at the massive contracts we've analyzed. The Space Force Range contract is a 10-year deal. The UK SMR contract is a 14-year deal. The Sellafield decommissioning framework is a 15-year partnership.
Right.
When Amentum wins one of these mega projects, the entire 10 to 15-year ceiling value is immediately dumped into the total backlog. It massively inflates the headline number on day one, making it look like they have $47 billion in the bank.
But the reality of government appropriations is entirely different.
Exactly. Governments rarely, if ever, fund a decade-long project up front. They fund it incrementally, year by year, through the annual legislative budget process. So the unfunded 86% isn't necessarily a sign that contracts are failing or being canceled. It is just the structural reality of how long-term government megaprojects are financed over the decade.
However, that reliance on annual legislative appropriations introduces significant risk, which brings us to the political landscape. Now, looking at these analyst reports, there is a lot of focus on the 2026 administration's efficiency reviews. To be clear to you listening, we aren't taking any political stance on these policies left or right. We are strictly looking through the impartial lens of the financial analysts to understand how these federal budget shifts mechanically impact Amentum's bottom line.
And the financial impact is the only metric the markets care about here. The reality is that approximately 80% of Amentum's revenue comes directly from the United States government. They're heavily exposed to federal budget volatility, continuing resolutions, and shifting defense priorities.
The bearish analysts specifically point to those federal efficiency reviews happening right now under the 2026 administration as a primary risk factor.
If aggressive federal budget cuts are mandated across civilian and defense agencies through these efficiency reviews, it directly threatens that massive, unfunded 86% of Amentum's pipeline.
Makes sense.
If the annual appropriations stall in Congress, or if the administration mandates severe agency-level budget cuts, those 10-year or 15-year contracts sitting in the unfunded backlog could face sudden scope reductions. The government might decide they only want 150 space launches a year instead of 500. Or they might experience significant delays in task order issuance for things like the MQ-9 drone support.
The ceiling value of the contract might say $4 billion. But if Congress only authorizes half the budget for the year, Amentum only sees half the revenue. It is a direct mechanical threat to their fulfillment pipeline.
It is the single biggest external risk to their growth narrative. But to their credit, the financial sources show Amentum is actively and successfully hedging this risk in two distinct ways.
Let's look at the first hedge, conversion momentum. Despite the looming threat of budget cuts and efficiency reviews, the data shows Amentum's funded backlog grew by a massive 20% year over year in Q2. That drastically outpaced the 7% growth of the total backlog. What does that tell us about their political risk?
It tells us that right now, the government is actively continuing to authorize and fund Amentum's specific work at an accelerating pace. Even in a constrained budget environment, the mission-critical nature of what they do, space launch, nuclear energy, drone operations, is prioritized. They are successfully converting the unfunded promise into real funded dollars at a 20% growth rate.
And the second way they are hedging, diversification. They are intentionally moving outside the federal perimeter to insulate themselves. We talked about the $425 million CL Fire contract. That is state-level funding driven by absolute environmental necessity the year-round California fire season.
Right.
It is completely decoupled from federal defense budgets or congressional gridlock. Furthermore, the reports note they're securing over $600 million in commercial data center and telecom awards. They're doing 5G installation, fiber optic networks, and AI workload retrofits for massive commercial hyperscalers.
It is a brilliant stabilizing move. Every dollar they earn from the state of California or a massive commercial telecom company is a dollar fully insulated from a federal government shutdown, a continuing resolution, or a federal budget efficiency review. It stabilizes the baseline revenue and proves their technical architect skills transfer to the private sector.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for investors and analysts watching this sector. The analyst reports frame the final verdict for your portfolio. Is Amentum the next Leidos, or are they just a bigger V2X?
That is the defining debate surrounding the stock right now. Those two companies represent the two poles of the government services market. Leidos is viewed as a premier, high-margin, tech-forward government solutions provider. They command a premium valuation because they are seen as a true technology company.
And V2X?
V2X, on the other hand, is a massive, capable, but fundamentally low-margin legacy defense contractor, heavily reliant on physical logistics and base operations.
Let's lay out the bearish argument first. The 7.9% margin trap. The bears look at all the incredible buzzwords we've discussed today. Space Force, artificial intelligence, small modular reactors, unmanned aerial systems. They look at the massive Jacobs integration that supposedly brought in all this high-end technical capability. And then they look at the Q2 income statement, and Amentum's adjusted EBITDA margin is sitting at just 7.9%.
Right.
Now, let's define EBITDA quickly. It stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Basically, it's a measure of the raw cash profit generated by the core operations of the business before the accountants and the tax man get involved.
And a 7.9% adjusted EBITDA margin is decidedly average for a legacy contractor. Even more concerning for the bears, that 7.9% represents only a 20 basis point year-over-year growth. It is relatively stagnant despite all the strategic maneuvering.
Right. The skeptics argue that Amentum is still fundamentally bogged down by its history. They argue they are still burdened by legacy cost-plus contracts that cap profitability. Let's explain why that matters. Because legacy cost-plus contracts literally mean the government pays your operational costs plus a fixed fee or percentage.
Yeah, you are mathematically capped.
You have zero incentive and zero ability to radically widen your profit margins by being more efficient. If you invent a brilliant AI tool that halves the time it takes to do a job, your costs drop, so your percentage-based fee actually drops in absolute dollars. The contract structure literally punishes innovation.
In addition to the cost-plus drag, the bears argue they are still dealing with the immense internal friction and overhead of integrating a massive 50,000-person merger. They look at the project portfolio and say, you can call it digital engineering sustainment, but you just booked a $112 million contract to physically dismantle radioactive hot cells in Europe.
Right, that's physical labor.
That is legacy, commoditized, hazardous labor. Until Amentum proves otherwise on the actual income statement, the margin profile suggests they are trapped in the single-digit reality of a traditional low-margin contractor.
It is a valid, numbers-driven critique based on the current trailing financials. But if we look under the hood of that margin percentage, the bull case offers a very compelling counterargument.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the bullish outlook acknowledges that a corporate pivot of this magnitude takes time, but insists that the mechanical steps are already in motion and are demonstrably working.
What are those steps?
The bulls argue you have to look at the forward indicators, not just the trailing numbers. Amentum is actively and aggressively shedding its low-margin characteristics. The $360 million divestiture of the Rapid Solutions hardware business proves they are pruning capital-intensive non-core assets. They are getting out of the factory business to protect their free cash flow.
And then you look at the accounting shift we discussed. The deliberate structural move to unconsolidated joint ventures for their massive energy megaprojects. They are willingly taking a 3% revenue headwind to eliminate those zero-margin pass-through costs of materials and subcontracted labor.
Yeah.
They are mathematically shrinking the denominator and dropping pure equity profit to the bottom line, which mechanically forces the margin percentage higher over time.
We already saw that mechanical shift work perfectly in the Global Engineering Solutions segment, hitting an 8.5% margin. And finally, you have their aggressive pursuit of the owner's engineer role in rapidly accelerating growth markets like space and nuclear.
Which changes their risk profile.
By acting as the strategic technical advisor for UK and Dutch nuclear new builds, rather than the physical construction crew, they are securing higher margin intellectual property work while drastically reducing their physical and financial risk profile.
The bulls argue that these are exactly the fundamental structural changes required to break through that single-digit margin ceiling over the coming years. It is a company in mid-stride. The architectural plans are drawn, the foundation is poured, the unprofitable hardware divisions are sold off, but the high-margin building isn't quite finished yet. The income statement is just lagging behind the strategic reality.
It is a classic transition story. The question for investors is whether they have the patience to wait for the accounting to catch up to the strategy.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. We have spent an hour dissecting how Amentum's entire corporate strategy relies on being a capital-light technical architect. They are desperate to avoid relying on hardware or factories or massive capital expenditures. Their singular product moving forward is intellect.
Intellect and human capital.
But that introduces a totally new, profound paradigm of risk. If your ultimate bottleneck to growth isn't physical factory space or access to raw materials, if your bottleneck is purely human intelligence, what is the limit to your scale? As the global demand for niche technological talent skyrockets, what happens to Amentum's profit margins when highly sought-after data scientists, Space Force radar specialists, and gigawatt nuclear physicists become their most expensive and severely constrained resource in a hyper-competitive global labor market?
It is the ultimate paradox of the modern service economy. You eliminate the massive cost of the machine, but you find yourself entirely at the mercy of the mind operating it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Risk defined, portfolio protected.